Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to the March 26, 2018 work session for the City of Jersey Village. On our agenda this evening, announcement of a quorum. Quorum is present, Madam Secretary.
Yes.
Very good. Moving to item B on our agenda this evening, discuss and take appropriate action regarding the scope and design of the criteria for the Jersey Meadow Golf Berm project. God, I sound terrible. Technical difficulty standing by. Okay. So item B, of course, we'll take have a discussion on the golf course berm project. Just as a quick refresher of how we got to where we are. As everybody knows, of course, the City of Jersey Village, we undertook a flood study, and as a result of the flood study, 4 major recommendations were made. One was to create a berm around the Jersey Village golf course to help floodwater runoff, and the second thing was to have some sort of a projects along the Wall Street corridor, the Wall Street, Crawford, and Capri. The third item is for the deepening and widening of White Oak Bayou, and the fourth is to undergo a home elevation or home buyout program. So those are the 4 things that were recommended to us, and the topic of this evening is for the city to address one of those topics, which is the golf course berm project. But before we get into a discussion on that, there's been some updates with the 2 of those agenda items, 2 of those projects. One, of course, is the deepening and widening of White Oak Bayou, as well as the city's application for elevation programs. So with that, I would like to turn the microphone over to the city manager, Austin Blease, for him to give us some updates on those other 2 projects.
Thank you, Mayor. As you mentioned, the 4 pieces of the long-term flood recovery plan. First off, I'd like to touch on the White Oak Bayou project for a brief moment. On the agenda for the county commissioners tomorrow is an item for the White Oak Bayou project. The agenda item is to authorize negotiations for deepening and widening of the White Oak Bayou from Tidwell to FM 1960. So this includes the bayou through Jersey Village. It's just the E100, not the E127. But in speaking with flood control today, they anticipate the design process to take a year and the construction process to take a year or so as well. So we should see progress construction on that happening in 2019. Also earlier today, I spoke with the Texas Water Development Board about the status of our grant application to elevate the 17 homes. As a reminder, only $90 million was allocated nationwide for these types of projects, and our total grant request was just about $3.4 million, or 4% of the total grant amount available. I was informed that our project has been identified for further review, which means that over the next few months, they're going to be giving those projects a close look to make sure that everything is ready before they actually award funds. So in the meantime, the state's going to be readying the contracts necessary with the city to issue the funds once that approved. So within the next 3 to 6 months, first phase of the elevation project should be moving forward. So both of those are definitely great pieces of the flood recovery plan that are moving forward.
Very good. Thank you, Austin. That's very encouraging news. So, and we'll keep everybody updated on the status of those individual projects. But for our agenda this evening, we're going to focus on the berm project. At this time, I want to turn the microphone back over to the city manager, Austin Blease, for a discussion on our berm and the necessary direction that staff needs from council this evening.
Great, thank you. So we have the survey results for the golf course before the council tonight. The maps also show where water would be contained depending on the different heights of a berm. A berm at 107 feet would contain about 105.6 acre feet of water. The long-term flood recovery plan had recommended a berm at a height of 108, which would be approximately 8 inches of freeboard to it, so the effective water level would have been 107.3. The plan thought it would hold 152.5 acre feet of water. If we dredge out some of the ponds or expand some of the ponds to use the dirt to help construct the berm, that would create more space, thereby adding to the amount of water that would be contained. We could also look at adding a new pond where the old tennis courts used to be, or there's other areas where we could add ponds as well. One thought in the creation of the berm was to elevate the cart paths and use that as the berm. It might work well in some locations, but certainly not in all locations across the golf course. Based upon the survey results and assuming a berm height of 107 feet, we would anticipate the berm to be approximately 2 feet high along the majority of Rio Grande behind the homes of Village Drive. It also looks like we might need a berm about 1 foot along the entrance of the driveway into the golf course. Our city engineer is sitting next to me tonight to help answer questions the council might have on this. Tonight we need to accomplish a general path for the berm, perhaps some ideas to incorporate it into the golf course, and some other next steps would be to get a construction cost estimate on a berm based upon our discussion tonight from the city engineer.
All right, any questions for Austin? Frank, do you have anything to add to that? As some introductory comments?
No, I don't. No, I believe Austin covered it all, and I'll just fill in the blanks. We basically surveyed the golf course with the idea of storing as much water as we could. And in doing that, we did some design calculations to find out how many acre feet can we store on the golf course given the height of the whatever we're retaining the water with, whether it's a berm or a wall or anything like that. And if you all will take a look at on the first sheet, this is kind of self-explanatory. What you see on the first sheet, that would be the 104 contour. So we would be impounding water to the 104 contour, but basically that's the 100-year floodplain. Actually, it's a little more than that, but kind of gives you a good idea. I guess maybe the 105 contour is closer to the 100. And if you flip the page to the 105, we're storing 18.1 acre feet. And the real key here is that we have to store as much as we can on that piece of property. And 18.1 acre feet isn't going to do us much good. The next contour we looked at was 106. We're storing 56.5 acre feet. We're impacting 58 acres. So in other words, water will be on 58 acres of the golf course, but it's still, it's not a lot of storage at the 106. The reason that this is important is that there were, in the Dannenbaum study, it was done without a topographic survey. And when you go out and you look at the golf course, you've got elevated tee boxes, you've got elevated greens, elevated cart paths, and so forth. So that's taken volume out. So this will give you a little more realistic picture of what you're going to get for spending your money. So at 106, we still are not impacting the storage shed, which is on the south side of the golf course. That's got the mowers and upkeep equipment and so forth. That is at 107, I believe. And I can't read this small, but anyway. So we move up to 106.5. That still spares the maintenance building, but we're up to 87.4 acre feet, and now we're starting to have some impact. So we flip to the next page, 107 contour. We're up to 105.6 elevation. That puts 6 inches of water in the storage in the maintenance barn. That's easy to fix. We can raise something, or you know. So in looking at this, we were thinking that this basically keeps water off of the homes over on basically the townhomes on the south side, and the others over on the southwest side, and it doesn't impact any of our neighbors. And going a little further with how can we do this without it being unsightly and still be effective? I'm going to leave the microphone here. I can talk pretty loud.
No, excuse me, you're going to need to use the microphone or we won't be able to have it on the recording.
And I've got two. Oops, sorry. So if y'all take a look. Look at the elevations on the cart path that pretty much encircle the site. Yeah. And just with some modifications to the cart path locations and then elevating the cart path slightly, it's only like 1 or 2 feet in some places. We can get that volume that we were talking about without building a wall or a berm or anything like that. Just use the cart path as the dam.
Frank, do you have this available in a projectable manner?
Not tonight.
Okay.
Kind of like they do with the rice fields.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get this either tonight or sometime earlier this week so we can post it on the website, I think that would be great.
We'll do that. As a matter of fact, Greg, you can't do that on your cell phone, can you? I'm sorry, Stephen, you can't do it on the, okay. And I've got an extra one for you. You can take it home.
Hey Frank, do you show the actual elevation on here, a proposed elevation of the wall?
Hey, Frank, do you have an extra one of these available right now so we can, okay.
Hey Frank, can we grab you back up here when you get a chance? The council's got some questions for you. Okay, Frank, any questions for Frank from council?
Actually, Frank, probably one of the biggest questions I've received from citizens since we've been discussing this project has been a question of safety. As you might imagine, some citizens, when they hear that a earthen berm might be built near their home, they start to conjure pictures of situations like the New Orleans levee with, after Hurricane Katrina and things of that nature. Now, I know that there are, based on what I've read, there's close to 100,000 miles of similar structures throughout the United States. And so in the grand scheme of things, I would imagine that a failure is fairly unlikely. But can you just address those specific concerns in regards to this design or this possible design that we're looking at?
Yes. I think that it's important to note, and if you look on the survey, generally the average elevation of the golf course is 104.5 to 105.5. So if we go to 107, we're only looking at 1.5 feet deep to 2.5 feet deep. The 2.5 feet deep is in very localized areas like the ponds. So they're going to be deeper, but they've always been ponds.
So even if it did, I guess, does that address the question of the likelihood of failure, or does that address the question of if it failed, what its impact would be on the surrounding homes?
It addresses both. It's just 1.5 to 2.5 feet, and we hold that kind of water in all sorts of ditches and so forth around here. And if it fails, the breach is not going to be catastrophic like a big dam breach or something like that. It's just going to start draining out. And if we were to not do this project in an event that basically would cause flooding, that's the same thing you would see.
Frank, talk to us about the materials of construction that we would have available for us. Kind of walk us through some of the options we would have as far as earthen versus concrete, something like that. What kind of options would we have on something like this?
If we were to design this with the idea that the golf cart paths would be elevated, then we would just be using dirt. There's asphalt on top of them. It'd be compacted, stabilized, and again, it's not going to be under a lot of hydraulic pressure.
So, from a drainage perspective, once the golf course is holding water, what's the plan for it to drain off? Does it just evaporate over time? Or is there
The golf course has a drainage system, and it outfalls just right over here off of Rio Grande. It's a 48-inch pipe, and we'll put in a structure a little larger than a manhole that's going to have a flap gate in it. The flap gate is it's basically a vertical valve that if the bio comes up, it's going to shut, and it's going to keep the water in the golf course. But when the bio goes down, when the tributary of White Oak goes down, then it's going to open up because of the differential pressure, and it's going to drain the golf course just like it always drains. And you already have a flap gate up on the northeast side of town. So
I have had a few citizens that live near the golf course, near the drainage, the outfall pipe that's currently there, probably closest to the townhomes. They've expressed some concern about debris getting into that drain and clogging it. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that system at all, or whether there's a recommended method to ensure that doesn't happen.
The flow as the detention pond fills and finally discharges after the storm event is going to be going to the southeast corner. So I would hope that whatever debris there is going away from them.
I took a tour last week and actually took pictures of it. There's it's not in the best shape, but it's definitely something that we need to include in construction planning, is having that outfall either renovated or looked at, or just something to where it's a little more substantial. Right now it kind of looks like an old-fashioned well and with some pipes in it, and I see what you're saying. We may also want to consider, just some thoughts, having maybe like a redundant outfall. Now I know you can't put another outfall into the bayou, but maybe you can have another release valve as a backup, just in case a big old log or my golf clubs that I threw away and end up down there. Are there any other control structures that maybe we want to consider, or should that pretty much be just like a control structure for safety purposes, redundancy, any SCADA that we should maybe implement?
All of those could be done. One of the design features of this is not to add another outfall into the bio. We want to keep what we got. We don't want to touch it. We don't want to have to go through the approvals.
I guess to what degree, obviously we can't touch the actual pipe itself. I assume we can still do something regarding the actual drain where the water enters.
Just like a secondary drain, so if something does clog the first one, there's a second one that's still taking water. Not a whole nother outfall down at the bayou. I know that's not, I don't want to get involved with Harris County.
Yeah, I envision a new drainage system between all of the ponds that directs the water to the outfall. Idea being is that most of the slopes internal to the golf course drain towards the ponds, and then that's our main avenue of getting water out is the last thing. The first thing that comes up during the storm is the ponds. The last thing to go down is the ponds.
So now that we're kind of talking about ponds, and forgive me if we're moving too far if you want to stop, but How they're linked up, I mean, if you look at Google Earth and there's a feature where you can go back and look at what the golf course looked like back in the 50s, and it's kind of neat. It's an actual tributary of White Oak Bayou, and the golf course was essentially put smack dab in the middle of that thing, and now there's the water wants to go there, but it's not. But it does flow down to that southeast corner. One of the things that Dannenbaum identified in their study was the storage capacity was approximately, I mean, their math, that's not including, the greens and stuff like that, but it's about 150 acres of storage or 150 acre feet of storage. If we can, is there a possibility of either adding new ponds or even excavating, dredging what we currently have and connecting them to add capacity?
Yes, we could make those ponds deeper, we could make them wider, and the idea was, again, if we're attached to a pump system and run by our SCADA system, we could actually drain the ponds prior to a major event. And that will give us more volume than what we've calculated here.
So one thing that I did, because I'm now a Google Earth pro now. I looked at the surface areas and I kind of did some measurements of what we currently have. I did a surface area of what ponds we have, the water features, not all of them, but the ones that are sort of involved in going down to that southeast side. And basically, and I'll pass this out and I'll give it to Lori to put on the website, but what I have is total existing surface area on the surface of all of our ponds is about 3.24 acres. If you dredged each of those down to 2 feet and you had a berm at 107 feet, you would have 112 acre feet of storage. And if you go all the way down to dredging down to 10 feet, if you added 10 feet of capacity to each of those ponds existing, you'd have 138 acre feet of storage. There are some ways also that I see on this map to add, and I talked to Matt Jones, the golf pro. We did a nice tour last week. There's some open spaces that are just completely unused. The tennis court area, we already talked about that, potentially putting a new pond there, lift station of some kind. That if you did that, you would add 1.87 surface acres. Dredge that down to 10 feet. Then you can do the math on the capacity there. Widening the hole number 8. There's a water feature next to hole number 8, the fairway on number 8. If you widen that out to areas that are not used, you're adding another acre. To the north side of the number 3 hole, there is a huge unused, must have been another green or something that's no longer used, but it's a big area. That in itself, if you do a new pond there, it would be 3.15 acres. So putting this all together, new surface acreage could be about 6 acres. All together, we could have about 9 acres of new storage surface area. Dredging that all the way down to 10 feet on all of them, you would have 197 acre feet of storage if the berm's at 107 feet. So I'll pass this out. Just wanted to kind of address some concerns that we're not going to address the capacity versus the Dannenbaum study. I think there's a lot of potential here for going above and beyond that in a very simple way. So I'll pass this out to council members.
Frank, I want to talk a little bit more about utilizing the golf court paths for actually serving as the berm itself. When you look at under this concept, you're looking at the golf court paths right now. How much of the golf court path would we have to actually utilize of that? I mean, how much of that path do you envision? Probably the ones that just run along Rio Grande, kind of parallel to Rio Grande. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, it would be basically we actually want to move that one to the east. It'll be, that's probably the only one that we're going to substantially eliminate and move. but that would be what we would like to do.
And that particular golf course path, as it looks like it's flat on the surface now, you see envision it raising it approximately, what, 2 feet, give or take?
1.5 to 2 feet. Yeah.
Okay. And that's another question, and I think you may have already mentioned earlier. What is the highest elevation, and do we expect this to slope downwards as we go north?
To the northwest, it's actually dry. It gets up to 107 plus up in the corner. So what is shaded on the 107 map, that's what's going to be wet.
Now, Dannenbaum in its report recommended a berm height of 108 feet in elevation. Was there a reason we chose to bring it down to 107? Because it seems to lose quite a bit of capacity from that 1 foot drop.
107 seems to be an optimum. You could basically raise it up to 108. You're getting pretty close to the finished floor of your clubhouse. So we were trying to keep it below the finished floors of those structures you use now. Idea being is you're going to get more bang for your buck at 107 and maybe not as much damage to your golf course.
And I'm thinking this doesn't take into account the work that they're going to be doing on the channels, so we don't know how that will potentially impact the water flow yet. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, this doesn't take into consideration any work on the channels.
We're just talking about the water that's falling on the golf course at the moment, and water that's falling basically in Jerseyville is what the city's responsible, I would say, for containing. At some point, the bayou is not our friend. Obviously, at some point, it turns from friend to enemy, and at that point where the bayou is over the banks, this kind of becomes a moot point. But hopefully with the improvements that'll be coming up in the channel, plus this keeping 100 plus acre feet out of Wall Street neighborhood is a pretty big deal. So, but this is not really to take capacity from the bayou at all.
Hopefully not.
And even in the Dannenbaum
that's
study,
everybody else's water.
right? And even in the study, I think the effect of an 108 foot berm was only I think it was 0.05 feet at the Lakeview Bridge, if that. I think it was something like that, something very minuscule. So this really is not about affecting the bayou. This is about keeping water from Wall Street that has fallen on the golf course and on the city itself.
Councilman Holden, you've joined us. Do you have any questions for Frank at this point?
I don't think so. I don't know how much you've discussed. I had an altercation with Houston Traffic, and they won today.
You're over.
What's that?
If you lost to Houston Traffic, that means you're over.
Yeah. I think, one of the, I talked with Frank earlier last week, and one of the things that kind of came to light to me and kind of a little bit of clarity, my big concern all along, I think a citizen's concern, was that this berm was going to be a monstrosity of a structure. And I think through conversations with Frank and the topo survey that they've done and looking at the actual, what would actually be needed, the corner of Rio Grande and Village is probably the highest point of a berm. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
And I think what we're looking at is an elevation increase of 24 inches or 2 feet. I think as per our discussion, that berm, the cart path essentially could be incorporated into the berm. So, we can construct a berm, minimize any obstructions, and make it amenity, or make it a part of the golf course. And that's worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario at the worst part of the golf course. So I think I think through this process and the information that Frank has brought forward as far as the contours, if there's any question as to whether or not this is an effective project or not, I think that we pretty much put that aside and assume that, and make the statement that it is. And I think it's going to have minimal impact both visually and aesthetically and all the other concerns that we had. It's just a matter of how do we actually design it and implement it.
So from my perspective, what I would like to see us have happen, and staff's going to be looking for some direction of what we want them to do and where they want to go. What we have right now is we have, in essence, a 2-foot berm that basically tapers off, holding water on the golf course instead of running down the streets, down Wall Street, down Crawford, down Capri, keeping water on the golf course during a major rain event. I think it's very important that we set the criteria of what we want this berm to be and what we don't want it to be. It's very important that, from my perspective, that any berm that we go forward with, one, is actually effective and actually keeps the rainwater on the golf course per the design. 2, it does not actually send water into somebody else's house. Thirdly, that it actually complies with the aesthetics of the neighborhood. And fourthly, I think it's very important that any berm we create that doesn't actually impact the playability of the golf course. And so, from my perspective, those are the directives I think that we should be giving staff this evening. Does anybody have any comment on maybe those criteria that we have?
I mean, I agree with those criteria. To go more to the point of making sure we're not impacting other people who are not currently flooding. Just to provide some additional input, I've heard from citizens. There's some concern, particularly from those homeowners who have townhouses along Village Drive, that they're worried about the drainage in their backyard because the way that the buildings are designed, they're kind of locked together. And so I would just encourage that the design incorporate some sort of drainage, in this case, if it's set far enough back, maybe it's just the natural flow of the course, away from the homes, and if not, maybe some sort of artificial drainage into the storm drainage system might be appropriate. But I think that's an important aspect of the design to keep in mind.
And it will be. Well, that'll be incorporated. We're going to shy away from storm sewers that work both ways, though, so we may have another flap gate there. We'll see.
Let me ask this, assuming we go forward, give some criteria, give some direction, and I don't know if this is anything that's possible. Is there any way we could see a rendering of what this thing would visually look like? Is that something that could be developed? We'll go with what he says, absolutely. I think that'd be very helpful for us to kind of get a visual picture of what this thing would look like. Somebody, you agree? Okay. So, when we're talking about the berm, where up to this point we've been talking about the standalone berm itself, the impact it would have on flooding, the impact it would have on the golf course. There's another concept, Frank, and I want you to kind of discuss this a little bit, is possibly tying the two together with some Wall Street improvements. There are some concepts, some additional concepts on the Wall Street improvements that I think have been discussed before. Can you elaborate a little bit on some of the things we could do on Wall Street to kind of incorporate them into the berm project as well?
I think one thing that needs to be recognized is Wall Street is significantly lower than the golf course by several feet. And so in order to relieve the Wall Street subdivision area, which is very much in the floodplain right now, but let's just assume that the storm event does not overflow the bayou or the White Oak or the tributaries, then if you could move the water in the Wall Street system, in the storm sewer system, and put it onto the golf course where we have excess storage capacity, then it would need pumps, but it could be done. And it'd be done basically by lowering the hydraulic gradient in the storm sewer, and with the pumps, which would go into Wall Street, into the golf course, and then keep Wall Street's drainage system working. As it is right now, there's only 1 foot of fall across the entire subdivision. It's not even 1 foot in some places. And so you have to have fall for any storm sewer system to work. Artificially, you could create that with a pumping system. And there's a lot of talk about putting in great big storm sewers. And that would not necessarily increase the flow into the bayou off of Wall Street, because when the bayou comes up, the storm sewer's full, and it doesn't have any gradient down to the bio to move water out. So, yeah, it can be done, but it's going to have to, and there are improvements within the subdivision that can be done. We've had a lot of discussions many years ago about that. I believe there were some improvements done, but nonetheless, none of them are going to significantly improve the drainage system on Wall Street unless we can make whatever system we put in actually flow.
Can you elaborate a little bit on this concept of the pumping stations? How many pumping stations would we have? Where would they be located? And kind of how would they work to actually take water from Wall Street and put it onto the golf course?
This is conceptual, and
That's why it's a workshop.
yeah, basically we could connect to Carlsbad and Wall Street where we have a discharge point there. Put in a flap gate in that system that goes to the bio. Same thing when the bio comes, when the water surface in the tributary comes up, it shuts the gate. No more water from the tributary can back up into Wall Street and clog up the storm sewer system. A connection could be run from that point, Carlsbad and Wall Street, down to where there used to be the old tennis courts, and it would be. There you could put in a stormwater pump station. They're used all over the place. We put them in all the time for a lot of our detention ponds at schools and large developments that the bottom of the detention pond is actually below where it discharges. So we'll pump it out, send it into a bar ditch or into a Harris County flood control ditch, and they're pretty much all over the place. But anyway, that storm sewer from Carlsbad and Wall Street could go east or west to Rio Grande, where the old tennis courts are, and we could conceptually put a pump station in there. It could be run off our SCADA system. It could be set to come on at points that, design-wise, the water surface elevation, when it gets to a certain level in the storm sewer system, these things come on, and they can pump a lot. That's a design calculation as to how much can that system feed to them. We don't want them coming on and off. The other thing is that same pumping system could be used to evacuate the ponds prior to an event. It can also be used to pump down the golf course if there's available capacity in the tributaries. So, I kind of foresee a way to use, and we do have excess capacity in the golf course. I'm talking about the 100-year, which we seem to have every 5 years. But nonetheless, that's where we could put that water. The nice thing about it also is we're detaining our runoff. We're taking it and detaining it. It's not going into Harris County flood control. So I don't believe there's going to be any issues from them if they get a reduction in the amount of water that comes off of this area of Jersey Village.
So if we do have this location at Wall Street and Carlsbad, conceptually, of course, this would alleviate along the entire Wall Street corridor all the way to Senate. Would it also affect positively as you go north into the Crawford and Capri area? Would this pumping station and pumping concept improve the street drainage in that whole area in a major rain event?
That can be looked at. Right now, I'm just looking at Wall Street, but I know that all of these areas have the same problem. Jersey Village has subsided significantly over the last 15 years in several different areas. When it was designed, it wasn't necessarily designed for the streets to carry the major event. As a matter of fact, Carlsbad basically blocks the drainage from the east-west streets. It's higher. And so it's up to just the storm sewer system to carry the major event, and it's too small. But all it can do is just carry it so far because you don't have any elevation differential. But yes, it can sure be looked at.
Another thought is, I think that's been batted around as well. In addition to this, what about increasing the inlet size on those streets? Is that something that would help in conjunction with the pump station, something like that?
Yes, in certain areas. You can evaluate drainage areas and change the inlet sizes. I know that that's already been done out there. The second thing that I'd recommend that is to put in grates on the BB inlets rather than the flat plates. It doubles the inlet capacity, and that's cheap. The only problem is it gets leaves in it.
We have a street sweeper now.
Have you done any rough calculations of cost? I mean, I know we're talking about a change in design here, and of course, when I start hearing about pumps, my first thought is that's quite a bit of expense. Are we able to sufficiently offset that by avoiding work that we would have otherwise done on Wall Street?
There's an offset. I can't tell you how much. Once things are sized and we troubleshoot basically what's out there, what works and what doesn't. A parallel line, some distance up Carlsbad, maybe even up on Capri where they have a real elevation issue up there. A lot of the houses, their foundations are right at curb level. That's why some of the backyards don't drain. So all that can be looked at. I know we've got a $5 million estimate on the Wall Street and a $700,000 estimate on the golf course. I would think, I'm just off the top of my head, we're offsetting some pretty serious storm sewer infrastructure with a pump station. I don't know if it's a wash or not. I just know that the pump station is going to be more effective.
In the Denenbaum study, there was a capacity of oversizing the drainage on Carlsbad, Wall Street. What was that additional storage capacity?
1.6 acre feet was basically the storage in the upsized storm sewer. That's not much.
Right. So
their whole premise was it was going to increase the flow in the storm sewer. But if you don't have, if the bio's up and you're basically 1 foot above the top of bank on the bio and you're 1,500 feet away, it's not going to flow very much. It's going to trickle.
And so basically all you've gained is 1.6 acre feet of detention. Whereas if you add a foot to the berm, at 106 on the berm, you have 56.5 acre feet. And if you add another foot at 107, I don't see, 107 gives you 87.
No, go down one more. There's one more.
That's 106.5. So by adding 1 foot to the berm, you basically double the capacity of the golf course berm project
I believe you're right, yeah.
versus so it's about 40 times more detention by pumping it onto the golf course than oversizing the pipes on Wall Street. And
We're not getting much detention on the Wall Street pipe. So, but yeah, I think it's worth noting that the Wall Street subdivision, I believe, is like 66 acres, thereabouts. Depends on whether you count to the edge of the bio or just to the backyard fence, that sort of thing. But a 100-year rainstorm out there is around 12 inches. So we're talking about 66 acre feet. If that gives you some idea of the possibility of storage in the golf course. The other thing that I just need to point this out is that during the storm event, you do get some drainage, at the beginning of the storm and at the end of the storm if the bio does go down. But if you were to just take all of the rainfall in the Wall Street subdivision, you should be able to get it on the golf course. And I just want to point out also that this can be modified, changed, expanded in years to come. We can put in, like you say, what you've done here. This works great, and if we have the capability of drying these things out before another Hurricane Harvey blows in, then that's what we just have a big fish fry. But that's again, this isn't the end all be all. We can actually make changes in the future if we think we can do something that's cost effective.
So for the concerns of people on Wall Street and the Wall Street subdivision, the pumping project or the proposal is still, it still entails some oversized pipe on Wall Street and a regrading of that pipe in order to get it to flow correctly. But in the end, you're really designing a system with a capacity that's multiple of what we're currently talking about with the street reconstruction.
That's correct.
Okay.
And to piggyback off that, I think what I'm hearing you say, and if you can confirm this, although we are losing capacity on the golf course over the original contemplated design at 108 feet, it sounds like you're saying that based on the size of Wall Street and based on a 100-year flood event, that there's more than enough capacity on the golf course to be able to pull that water out of Wall Street. In other words, having the 108-foot berm would not necessarily provide that much more flood mitigation based on the area we're talking about. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, also, we're not having to rebuild your buildings out there.
This water that's going to be in the Wall Street area, it's not a static amount. You start pumping it out, there's still more coming in. So it's not like a measurable amount. It's coming from the bio. The bio goes over the banks and it's backing up into the Wall Street area.
If the bio comes up over the banks, then this system is ineffective.
Okay. Another question, the pump, is it going to be in the drainage system or where does it sit exactly?
Just for talking purposes, I was looking at the tennis court area, the old tennis court area.
Well, I'm talking about the entry point of the water from the Wall Street area. Where is it going to be in the drainage so it's lower than the street?
Yes. Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that all the outfalls in the Wall Street subdivision would have flap gates on them. So the water can only go out of the storm sewer system. But if it's out of the banks, then it doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, once it's out of the banks, the gates don't make a difference. It's coming over the banks.
That's correct.
Right, so what those floodgates are doing is at some point, like we said earlier, at some point the bayou stops becoming our friend. At some point, like during Harvey, it was our friend up to a certain point, and if the rain stops, drainage, it takes care of itself and it goes away, and then you're ready for the next 6 inches of rain or whatever. So at some point, these floodgates come in and stop our system from being basically a detention pond for everyone else's water. And then we have this supplemental pump to take care of whatever else falls on Wall Street, and the golf course takes care of the golf course rain and all that. That's kind of what the goal is with this system.
Right, and no matter what Dannenbaum's report said or whatever recommendations you come up with, if the bio comes up, nothing works. And Wall Street is very, very low. Not just Wall Street, I mean the subdivision.
Now, we've heard some reports recently about Harris County preparing potentially to make some modifications to the channel. At least to me, conceptually, I'm not an engineer, but it sounds like those the changes to the channel, if they widen and deepen it, it probably doesn't make a major impact to this project, other than the fact that it might keep it from shutting off the outflow pipe, sooner. Would that be accurate?
That's accurate, and I can only tell you that White Oak Bio is miles and miles long. A lot of, their concern was down towards downtown White Oak Bio, and so up here, they built some detention ponds and they put in the diversion to their detention pond that caused y'all to flood a few times, and it's gone now. But it kind of depends on what part of White Oak Bio they're talking about. I know that that philosophy was at one time to make everything bigger and put concrete on it. And now they're talking about taking the concrete out, turn them into sort of a park to slow down the water. So until they actually come up with a real, I read tunnels today in the Chronicle. So we're still looking. I think they're still looking, and we'll just have to hang tight and see what they come up with. But if you just keep communicating with them, Austin, Dustin, and make sure that you're one of the squeaky wheels, then, you know, maybe some of that federal money will benefit y'all.
So for our purposes this evening, it seems like we've got, so of course we've already authorized and we want to go forward with the berm. So we have a couple of things we've discussed. One, we've talked about the berm as a standalone entity and as a standalone expenditure. Then we've got some other kind of conceptual ideas, some pumping stations and things like that. What I'd recommend we do is we give staff the directive that we'd like to go and get a cost on a berm design. And again, I think it would be very important for us to see a rendering of what this berm would look like, basically kind of a very good picture of what this berm would look like and a cost of a standalone thing. But in addition to that, I think it would actually behoove us to see some of these conceptual ideas of a pump station that would actually take water from the Wall Street area to the golf course as well. So I think we should see some costs and a rendering of the berm. And then, as an alternate, a cost and maybe some costing and some designs and some engineering of what it would look like for us to do the berm plus that Wall Street improvement at the same time. So we can kind of look at, do we want to go forward with the berm, or do we actually want to go for a little bit further and do some of the berm as well as the Wall Street improvements at the same time?
All of this can be done incrementally, and that's easy. And we can, you know, we'll get you the renderings, and we'll start costing some stuff out. And as we talk and put together a plan that everybody's pretty much on board with, we'll revise the costs and so forth and just hone in on it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very important for council to see a couple of options that we may have before us. I mean, again, we definitely are highly interested in the standalone berm, but if there's some additional things we may want to take into consideration, I think that would benefit all of us to review that as well. So if we could get, and again, if anybody has any disagreement on that, I think we should see a couple of options brought before us.
I agree. I'll ask everybody else. I'd like to see just another option of adding ponds and dredging ponds deeper as part of it. If this can be implemental or incremental, then maybe not doing it up front, but doing it sometime down the road, we can at least have an idea of how much it would cost. And I'd like to see that if anybody else does.
Yeah, I just want to point out one thing on the golf course, that the really deep ponds, that's where your golf carts go, you know, after too many beers or whatever. And that's hard to get them out when it's a really, really deep pond, but.
I've seen that.
Yes.
So some life vests with some Jersey Meadow logos on them would be nice too.
If we're going to ask for a directive on costs, we need to know what the design of the berm's going to be. We've got to make a decision on that, what path it's going to take. I think have been talking about keeping it away from the fence of the houses on Village Drive.
So my thought on that, Gary, is that I think we have a general idea of what it's going to look like. I don't know if we're able to get into the level of specificity this evening. What I think we should do is give staff some directives. I think we have an idea of what some potential berm ideas may look like. Have them come together with some designs, some ideas, and a cost associated with it. Unless there's any level of specificity that we can give this evening, do you have any recommendations on that, Gary?
On the berm? Yeah, I'd like to see the berm go in front of hole number 5's green instead of going along the fence line. You'll lose a little bit of space there, but I don't think you're giving up much.
Well,
It can reach back at the fence line in front of hole number 7's tee box.
but keep in mind too that the outfall pond is right there. If you look at the map, that pond's outfall is almost up against. I mean, it's. I just took a tour of it. I have probably a picture on my phone. It's a cart path and a couple of yards, and then boom, you've got houses already. So if the ponds are part of this drainage system, which it is, then you would have to put a berm in front of that outfall pipe, however many feet somehow, and detain it all in there.
The way it is designed now, or what I've seen as far as the numbers, the width of the berm, it'll cover the drainage pipe at this point. So you're going to move that drainage pipe one way or another. And so if you go take the berm across that the old BIOS path, and put the drainage pipe in front of it, you've got the same thing.
You know, all good points. I think that we're going to be really well served if we let Frank's team evaluate a couple of these things and put together what they consider the best proposal. Anybody else on this? So where we're at right now is we've listened. You know, Frank's come to forward with a couple suggestions on a berm, some conceptual ideas of the berm, and some conceptual ideas of some additional pumping out of Wall Street to the berm to alleviate some of the water retention on Wall Street. But we actually have this item on the agenda as well. So we would actually give the formal recommendation and the formal directive we would give it actually during the council meeting this evening. This is just some work session discussions. Does anybody else have any other questions for Frank or any other suggestions, any other recommendations, any other questions when it comes to the berm construction, pumping stations, water retention, anything like that under this whole plan? Austin, does your team have anything else to add?
I think we're okay.
Okay. Then what we'll do, we'll go ahead and close the work session, and we will reconvene at 7 o'clock for the regular session. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this will be an agenda topic on the regular session, and we expect to give council staff some directives at that time. So with that being said, unless there's any other objection, the work session's adjourned. We'll reconvene at 7 o'clock.